The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
And welcome back again, wrestling fans. It is the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jason Bryant. Really excited about the show today, but before we get to our guest, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Luke Broadwater, wrestler, former coach. He's got some stories about his life at the Baltimore Sun, as well as wrestling at McDonogh and Division III Ithaca College, and had some big news come down the pipe the last couple days, last couple weeks. And I've been looking to get Luke on the show for several years now, and we go way back to our days on the East Coast at the Beast of the East and things of that nature, and just an all-around good dude. Been a long time since I'd talked to Luke, though, so really excited to get him on the program to talk about the journalistic medium, newspapers, some things that are newsworthy in how we cover not just sports, but how you are an investigative reporter, how you cover a beat. Basically maybe the strife that is the newspaper industry, and how you can still do a great job when people are yelling fake news at you all the time. Luke's got some interesting perspectives on that. If this is your first time checking out the show, thank you for listening. This is MadTalkOnline.com's flagship show, the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Couple, programming network notes. So, one, I do not yet have any information from Old Dominion University regarding my Freedom of Information Act request, in which I've requested a number of things. Now, I initially did ask the department and the athletic communications, for certain things about, like, the survey that they put out for the strategic review. That was a big fat GFY. You can figure that out. Actually, that's kind of some foreshadowing for this episode anyway. Well, I finally got some feedback from ODU's University Council. Now, when you file an FOIA request with the university, it usually goes through that legal team. And after being insulted by University Council on a reply all, I have not posted that response. My initial request was met with some snark and sarcasm. That was somebody who doesn't realize they hit the reply all button. Or maybe they did realize they hit the reply all button and were trolling me. Then I was given an address to send a check for the time it would take to calculate all this information or compile all this information for said FOIA request. They gave me the wrong address. Not only did they give me the wrong address, they gave me an undeliverable address. Then, after my check was returned, of course I hadn't had anything done yet, so 11 days go by before I know the check. They want to take a check, but for some reason, the reason they want to take a check is because everybody's working remotely. That doesn't seem to make any sense. They wouldn't let me pay electronically. And according to my former colleagues at the Daily Press and some colleagues that I have within the print industry now, the payment usually for something that's a quick digital copy, there isn't usually any fee for that. I'm asking for emails. I'm asking for communication between the consultant and members of the athletic department going back well before when the study was authored, because I feel like if this was put into motion and, for example, the athletic administration or the athletic foundation, rather, was still going after alumni and trying to raise money for a program they were already in the works of cutting, well, you know what? I may not be able to find anything illegal, but I'm looking for something unethical. So hopefully I can get some information from those FOIA requests. And if they're playing by the rules, which, I have my serious doubts about the ethical standard at my alma mater right now, which is, interestingly enough, the university president, John Broderick, who, again, I've mentioned numerous times, helped me a lot as a student. He really did. He really went above and beyond as a dean of students at the time he was helping me, and actually helped me stay in school. As an alum, he's ignored me. So other than the one appearance on the Monarch Madcast, which he spoke glowingly about the wrestling program, and now when it comes time to cut the wrestling program at ODU, he goes radio silent. Now, I did bring up facts about the student welfare, which his office said they would answer my questions. I sent those questions on April 16th. I have yet, 23rd, actually, late April. It's been 3.5 weeks. Still no reply. the reply I got after I sent the questions was, consider this the receipt of your questions. Okay, so his assistant received them. Now he steps down. Well, he's going to be stepping down in 2021, so he'll be around for a while, but here's the question. They've given me the wrong address. They've ignored me. They've blocked me on Twitter. They don't want to talk to me, and I'm just... It's one of those things. I'm staying on them. I've been pretty. It's not like I've been quiet on this. I've been trying to dig, but that's saying you can't bleed a turnip. I've had to put on. I mean, I've had to file an FOIA request since I actually really learned how to do it at Old Dominion. Go figure. So that's the update on the ODU front. If you go to almanac.mattalkonline.com, you will see a list of 100 and counting as of May 19th. I'm editing this show around 12:45 in the morning, on the morning of May 19th. This number will probably be added. We've had 100 lost college programs. 100. Almanac.mattalkonline.com. Click the COVID-19. It gives you the breakdown by conference, by school, by sport, the number of athletes impacted. I'm actually redoing this segment of the show. You didn't know that, but I went on like a power rant for about 10 minutes, and it's not something that you need to hear on the Luke Broadwater episode. This is about Luke. This is not about my power rants. I'll talk about that maybe on a solo show and the impacts of college sports. And finally, the housekeeping continues is if you are a fan of this program and, for example, you're looking to get a shirt because I don't sell the shirts. The Matt Talk Online shirts, which you have actually seen proliferate. Let's try that again. Proliferate. Through hashtag Wrestling Shirt a Day in May. Shout out Jim Dutrow. The Matt Talk Online shirts are not for sale. They are for patrons and monthly contributors of this network, specifically this show and the projects I'm doing, kind of like the collection of those drop sports at almanac.mattalkonline.com. If you want to get yourself a shirt, a draft glass, a beanie, some stickers, some access to the sandbox that is that Almanac, access to some early advanced podcast episodes via the Patreon group, you can become a team member by going to matttalkonline.com/contribute. You really get the perks when you hook up the Patreon perks campaign. Now, recently had a new team member join the family, wanted a shirt. I said, hey, this is how you do it. He's like, oh yeah, that's absolutely cool, man. Well, actually, that's not, I'm paraphrasing. I'm actually putting words in his mouth. But John Giarla from Salem, Virginia, originally from Salem. I'm not sure exactly where he lives at the time. Right now, I know his older brother James was a real pain in our ass as a Pocosin wrestler and beat my teammate in high school at the state tournament. But, John Giarla, welcome to the team, buddy. You're going to get some cool stuff in the mail here shortly. And if you want to be cool like John and talk about a calzone from Mac and Bob's if you're ever in the Salem, Virginia area, I highly recommend it because we ate there a lot during the AA state wrestling tournaments when the announcer went winner by pin. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with out in Salem. And I'd always have Eddie Grant stuck in my head because it's not Electric Avenue, it's Electric Street. But I was like, I'm gonna go to yeah. Anyway, that's not a song. I'm not an Eddie Grant aficionado, but. Anyway, John Giarla, latest team member. If you want to be him, be like him. MattTalkOnline.com/contribute. That's how you keep literally how you keep the show on the road. That's all I got for you now. Going to talk some newspaper stuff with the first ever Pulitzer Prize winner to appear on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. It's Luke Broadwater, and it's coming up now. Cue the swoosh. And for the first time in Short Time Wrestling Podcast history, we have a Pulitzer Prize winner on the show. Luke Broadwater from the Baltimore Sun, recently one of the, honorees for the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for local reporting for his coverage of the State House in the great state of Maryland, the Bay State. No, that's Massachusetts. It's what is Maryland's state motto? I should know this.
The Old Line.
The Old Line State, yes.
But if you just say something about Chesapeake Bay crabs, you'll probably people will know what you're talking about.
Well, see, you and I are going to fight over that because, see, we encompass more of the Chesapeake Bay, in my opinion, than Maryland does. I mean, you're up there where it's all skinny, man. Back where I'm at, it's a 28-mile bridge to cross it where I'm from. So I guess then again, we can share the crab since I'm really not a crab guy to begin with. I mean, every now and then I got to have a nice crab cake or something, but I don't know. The Chesapeake Bay blue crab.
do you guys do like bushels of crabs in Virginia, dump them on a table and crack them and eat them, or no?
Yes.
Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
In New York, they don't do that. That's like a Maryland thing, I always thought, but.
I think it's south of the Mason-Dixon thing, because I think once you pass that old line, you get to where you can enjoy your seafood as such. But Luke's on the show for a couple reasons. One, because he's got a pretty good award there, and then two, he's got quite the wrestling background. He's been writing about wrestling for a while, even with his role at the Baltimore Sun, and has some coaching credentials with the NCWA, as well as a pretty modest high school career. Been covering this sport a long time, and just brass tacks, what was it like to get a Pulitzer for your work?
Well, it was a big honor. It was a big honor for the paper because the Baltimore Sun, and I don't know how much people know about local journalism, but local journalism has had tremendous cuts over the years at local newspapers. I mean, probably a lot of people on your show probably maybe grew up reading the local sports section and seeing the wrestling stories and the wrestling coverage. And it's been so whittled down because of all these huge cuts to the industry. So the Sun hadn't won a Pulitzer Prize since 2003. So that's 17 years ago. So for us to win it this year was a huge honor. And, everyone was really excited. And it was a big boost to the whole newsroom. Personally, I feel like kind of validated my career choice, because for a long time I thought I would really pursue wrestling coaching, and I had some opportunities along that lane, and ultimately I thought like I would maybe make more of a difference as a journalist, and so I pursued that lane instead. And for the Pulitzer Committee to look around the whole country and say this is some of the best journalism in the country was obviously a huge honor.
So explain the story a little bit. It was the Healthy Holly situation is based on what I've read. And for when you explain local journalism, what is your beat? What did your beat entail? And how did you stumble across this story that actually created such such notoriety, I guess?
Yeah. So my job is to cover the State House in Annapolis. I cover politics, and I really view my job as sort of a watchdog for the taxpayer, and to hold government officials accountable, to hold powerful people accountable, to make sure the average citizen isn't getting ripped off. And so in this case, I was able to uncover with colleagues at the paper a self-dealing scandal at the largest hospital network in the state of Maryland that involved the mayor of Baltimore, involved some other very powerful people. This was a situation where people on the board of directors were cutting themselves into lucrative contracts at the same time as they were raising rates on the patients and raising the bills of those of us who go in and use the hospitals. And one of the people on the board was the mayor, a woman named Pugh, and she had been paid $500,000 from the board of directors to produce these self-published children's books, which many of which were never published, many of which sat in a warehouse unread, many of which were never delivered, some of which were double sold and triple sold. And so it was a real scandal that resulted in the mayor resigning, the CEO of the medical system, a guy who made more than $4 million a year, resigning, the whole board of directors resigning. Emergency legislation got passed in the State House Capitol to reform the board and prevent this type of thing from happening again. And it was a rush of like 3 months of really intense coverage, writing stories every day. And then finally, basically a year later, when the awards come out, the Pulitzer committee said this was some of the best reporting in the country.
How do you uncover something like that? Because right now I'm digging into my old journalism bag of tricks, because I haven't been a print journalist for a long time. I worked at a daily paper. I mean, you pretty much had the same kind of starting, meager beginnings we both had, but I got out in 2005. And then, I haven't filed a Freedom of Information Act request in like 15 years. Covering sports, you don't really do investigative journalism as much anymore. And in digging up stuff on this Old Dominion situation, which I think that there's some things aren't above board there. I think there's some unethical situations that went along with that cut. I'm getting into the whole digging through. I still haven't received that paperwork yet from Old Dominion through my FOIA request, but it kind of like it starts the gears rolling. It's like, wow, how do these guys do this all the time? So where do you live? Was this something in public records that you found? I guess the first smoking gun. I mean, how does the research go about this day and age when there's a lot more access? It used to be LexisNexis searches if we were lucky, and now it's a lot more internet. But you also have to do the old school reporting as well.
Yeah, it's a combination between source reporting, internet digging, Freedom of Information Act requests, like you say. In Maryland, we call them Public Information Act requests. And you got to do the basics well. In some ways, it's a lot like wrestling. Like if you do the basics well, good things eventually happen. If you do the basics well every day. And you don't get too fancy, you don't get too sensationalistic, you don't, do things that are over your head. You just make sure you do the basics right. So the way this works was I got a tip one day. One of the things you do as a reporter is you build up your source base. So you're talking to people all the time. You're getting people to know that if they have some information that's in the public interest, they should come to you with it. And so I was at the movies with my kids on the Sunday, and I got a call from a state senator. And she said that she had some questions about the contracting practices at the hospital network because a minority contractor in her district was trying to get work there and the processes seemed very opaque, and she didn't know how do they get these deals. And she said, they won't give me any records. You're good at finding things out. You're good at investigating things. Can you look into it? So I said I would. And I always try to go in the front door first. So I went straight to the communications director at the hospital network and said, I would like copies of all your contracts, who's getting them, how much they're for, whether they had competitive bids or not, and how many went to the board of directors. And they told me to go pound sand. And so I said, game on, like that's the best way to get a reporter going, is to tell them they can't have some information. Like that's
the good old GFY.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, so then I started source reporting. So I called some people in the know. I called people who knew something about the board. And eventually they said, well, look, the hospital network doesn't have to give them to you, but they do have to file some disclosure forms with an oversight commission up in Timonium. And that's like north of Baltimore. And they should have records up there. Nobody ever looks at them. Nobody ever reads them. So I put in a request. I guess they had some intern pull these things out of a drawer and fax them down to me. And I'm flipping through the records. And then I start seeing, oh, this board member is getting $300,000 a year. Oh, this board member has a multi-million-dollar insurance contract. Or this board member. And so I was going through one by one and finding all these things out. And then I came upon the mayor. And I had seen the mayor's books before, and I knew, based on having observed them, that they were unlikely to really be selling in the same volume as Harry Potter. So I thought that was probably something suspicious, and that really got everything going. But that's how it came about. Started with a tip, then some more source reporting, then a Public Information Act request, then finally getting the documents. And lots of times you do that, and you get nothing. Right? Like nothing much, big deal. And you just wasted like a couple of days. But sometimes you can have a really impactful story. And so that's what happened here.
Yeah. And a lot of the times that those of us who may not be familiar with, the inner workings of a daily newspaper, it's not always glamorous. Like you see, with Zoe Barnes and House of Cards trying to, go after the president and, all the political websites and such. It's sometimes you dig and you get nothing. Sometimes you dig and you get a story. And at what point did you realize that the story was actually pretty big? You're like, whoa, this is serious here.
I thought it would be, so right away I thought there's something amiss here. There's something bad. And, but I called, because you don't want to get overly excited as a reporter and get too sensationalistic and start hyping things up unnecessarily. So I called a couple colleagues who I really respect, and I said, "Does this sound like a scandal to you?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And so I was like, "Okay, that's a good sign." And so I started. I wrote the first story. I wrote it really straight. I thought, I'm not going to pick on anybody. I'm going to give everybody their best defense. It's going to be a really straightforward news story. No spin, no taking sides, anything like that. The story came out, and I could see it was starting to get an impact because it was starting to go viral online. And then the next day, all these shoes started to drop. The people were stopping in my office in the State House and saying, "You're just scratching the tip of the iceberg." So it was, and the Speaker of the House said he thought this would be the greatest scandal in the history of the legislature. So I started to think like, all right,
no pressure, right? No pressure.
We've got a big story. We've got a big story in our hands. And then like more and more things started to happen. The mayor started to misrepresent the facts on certain things. She, said, "Well, I only have this one contract, this one company." She said that on the record and put it in the paper. And then more people started coming forward. No, it's more than that. It's bigger than that. There's more and more of these deals with, in other cases, people who want big healthcare contracts from the city. And they were told they should buy these books. And so there was several more big donors in the mix. And so with each sort of lie or misrepresentation or untruth, you could then peel that back and expose some other part of the scandal. And we also wanted to make sure we weren't just focusing on the mayor, even though that was perhaps the highest profile official, that everybody got a hard look. So we did good, tough, fair stories about everybody, and let the chips fall where they may. And then ultimately, we had this ultimately resulted in a federal prosecution. So yeah.
Again, back to the TV cliches. And did you get any threats through this?
I don't know about threats. Like my mom called me at one point and was like, "Luke, you got to be careful." And I was like, I think that's like a TV thing, Mom. Like, but you get angry emails, you get people accusing you of bias and malice, and you would get some yellers sometimes. But what was weird is it was much more the opposite of what you think. It was mostly we got people cheering us on. Like people were happy that like the newspaper wasn't covering corruption. Like they wanted that. And so the public rallied around us in a way that you don't often see. Lots of times you get a lot of hate mail when you write stories, but I would say more than hate mail, we got a lot of positive comments about this is really the job the newspaper should be doing, is exposing this kind of thing. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Is it kind of hard to get something out there in, I guess, what I'd like to call it clutter? You see your news feeds, you see your Twitter feeds, you see all sorts of, anybody can put up a website and make it look like a news source and trick people, no matter which side of the aisle you prefer to be on, or if you're a conspiracy theorist or if you're not. So how do you get something that's like legit news, to be noticed and have people say, wait, this, and people not shout fake news at you, for example?
Well, you're going to get people to say fake news. That's always going to happen. Like you just have to live with that.
That's like the new no comment, right?
Right. And everybody does it now. Like, Republicans, Democrats, like whenever there's a story somebody doesn't like, it's fake news. But I think the thing that stands out is original content. So when you have a story that no one else has, and you're not just taking something that somebody else wrote and reaggregating it and reaggregating the reaggregation, which is what a lot of people are doing on the internet these days. If you're producing original reporting, if you're exposing things that nobody else knows about, if you're bringing facts that people want hidden to light, then it's like irresistible for people to want to read it. So that's what makes it. When you have a big story, it breaks through. It's like always going to break through. So now I will say there are times when you think you have a big story and it ends up not to be a big story, and then nobody cares. But this one, I think it was transparent to everybody who saw it. It was apparent to everybody who saw it that this was a big story and you should pay attention.
You brought up the, questioning your career choice and going in journalism, and we see what's happening with the newspaper industry right now. My old paper has now combined with, I guess, its main regional competitor, even though there were two separate areas. The Virginian Pilot and the Daily Press used to basically cover the two separate areas in Hampton Roads. The Rocky Mountain News is gone out in Colorado. Their paper's closing. They're consolidating. I think the paper I used to work at, they sold the whole print office, their giant building, 2-story building, and took up a whole city block. That's gone. They're who knows where they're at now. They're basically been downsized and consolidated. And when they're taking away from the local papers. I mean, I know our local sports writers, we used to have 7 or 8 that would cover the beats locally in high schools, and same with the news side. And what's it been like to see the industry kind of, I don't want to say collapse around you, but there's very few papers that are really on strong footing right now. And with, the proliferation of, blogs, internet, podcasts, I mean, all sorts of ways to cover news now, it's like, how hard is it to really break a story with the print media, given the resources that you don't have the teams like you used to? You don't have 5 people that you can put on a story. It's sometimes you and maybe an intern or somebody's like, hey, stats guy, go for this or something like that.
Yeah, I've seen a tremendous demise in local papers. I believe the Sun has gone from 450 journalists to less than 90, maybe 85 total journalists. And I remember being a kid, and I used to run out the front door and get the paper, and I'd read all the wrestling box scores. And we used to have every box score in the paper. And then you'd have a really good article written by Lem Satterfield. And we still do cover wrestling at the paper, and we do still cover stories, but everything's been diminished, and you don't see the box scores anymore. We do have a really good guy who covers wrestling for us. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing has shrunk. So you have fewer resources. It's harder to do things well. And so you sort of have to, like they say, do more with less, and you never do more with less. It doesn't happen, but you can still achieve in this environment if you know how to do it, if you focus and if you work hard. And I always thought that was the thing that wrestling gave you as a person. Wrestling wasn't going to necessarily make sure you were a big success, because you have to sort of find the line of work in the career where you best fit, where you have a certain acumen and a certain talent and a certain passion. But once you find that, then everything you learn from wrestling really helps. Then doing 2-a-days and getting out there when you're dead tired from cutting weight, and getting pinned in the semifinals and having to wrestle back a half an hour later. All those things that you had to go through you can draw on that to make you really good once you find your right lane of work. And I've found that employers really appreciate somebody who's reliable, consistent, a hard worker, determined, and also takes personal accountability, 100% personal accountability for how you're going to do your job, not blaming others, not saying, well, so-and-so did that, or no, I'm going to get it done, and you can count on me to do it. And so those are the things that I think wrestling's been really beneficial to me, as I've, I still have a hand in wrestling. I'm still on the board of the National Hall of Fame for Maryland, and I do some other stuff. My kid's going to probably start wrestling pretty soon because he just turned 5. But I've been a little bit hands off from the sport over the last few years. But the lessons from the sport have helped me in a different line of work.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to those lessons here in a second. Last thing I want to mention on, as far as the newspaper reporting side of thing, maybe 1 or 2 more questions, because when I talk media, it's super meta when I talk about reporting. Sure. and things. Yeah. But the years I spent, answering the phones and writing high school wrestling and football and such. But it's the change in what's been required of a journalist. The pay hasn't really met the price of inflation. If you see any lists, I think we're just above janitor in terms of actual career, yeah. Career aspirations in terms of finances. I remember seeing a list. It was the 50 worst jobs you can have, and 49 was news reporter. 50 might have been high school janitor or something like that. But gone are the days of filing one story, going home, waking up and doing it again. You got to tweet, you got to live blog, you got to, do video, you've got to edit video. Sometimes you're doing podcasts, sometimes you're editing podcasts. Oh, then you've got to write your story. Then you got to edit your story. Then you got to update your story. The AP used to do those things. They were called write throughs. You'd file a story. All right, we got an edit. The paper gets it before print. Boom. You might get the latest story. You might have to edit your story 3 or 4 times. Now, when you post it, once your desk gets a read on it, I mean, how many times are you even actually getting a read on it? And then something happens, you got to edit it. I mean, that's like live immediately. I mean, by the time you get an actual print edition, it might have been changed 4 or 5 times.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are days when you can watch a story be written and changed and edited throughout the day that I'll do. It actually makes the job both harder. Well, it makes it harder in the terms of time demand, but it makes it easier in a couple other ways. And so it used to be when I first started in journalism, and you did too, you'd write one story. You reported throughout the day, you filed it by the deadline. Deadline was 6. That meant something. So you filed it like 5:55 or whatever, or 6:01.
5:59, 55.
Yeah. And the editor would read it. And then the next morning it would come out. And so that was like one thing you had to do. Now, let's say the event happened, like let's say a bill passes that I'm covering. I got to file it immediately. I've got to have, and I probably wrote a shell already that the bill was going to pass. And I put that story online. Then it passes, then I update it. I add in quotes and comments. I might delete some comments that were now outdated. And then there'll be a write through where people come back and there's reaction now. We go out and we call, maybe there was a bill that affected small businesses. So I'm on the phone with small businesses and they're adding in their comments, and then people are against it and there's a criticism. And so you update it throughout the day and people can see it throughout the day. But that also means you ended up writing like 3 versions of the same story. So it took like 3 times as much work. That said, the story being online earlier means that sometimes tips and leads and ideas you didn't think of about the story will come in while you're writing it. So somebody will say, oh, hey, did you know that this was tried 10 years ago? And I didn't realize that. And then you go search the archives and you can put in that context or whatever. So, so there are some benefits to doing it live on the fly. There's probably a lot of negatives too. You're probably more likely to have errors on the online edition because you're writing so fast and it only went through one editor instead of 2 editors and a copy editor before it came out. So there are definitely some detriments, but you learn to be fast and accurate, and that's what you got to try to do: fast, accurate, and fair.
I'm still trying to get to wrestling, but I still want to keep talking about this because I feel like with the world, the way the wrestling world is, and maybe we can get your outside view on what your opinion is of how wrestling media treats the sports, because we've got recruiting news that breaks. We've had some controversial topics that have come out over Twitter. We've had some stories that we've been waiting on. The most recent thing I think that's come up was the Hawkeye Wrestling Club and the he said, she said, literally about what's going on with their women's funding there. And in a perfect world, how do you see some of these stories unfolding if say, the Baltimore Sun were going to cover them? Because right now, a lot of us have vested interests in it. Like I have clients at Virginia Tech and NC State. I am not necessarily, I'm a hired gun in those situations, whereas there are contracts with certain schools and certain outlets, and there are relationships and things like that. I mean, we are all personal. We cover our friends in wrestling. That's what happens. So it creates a lot of those ethical blurriness, so to speak. And maybe for those who believe that, who's your source and blah, 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 in terms of how we report on wrestling and how we, or maybe even not report, sometimes we'll sit on something because what good comes out of it kind of thing. I mean, how would you look at how the sport of wrestling covers itself right now from an outside perspective?
Well, you sort of have limited options for wrestling coverage, right? It's like, maybe 3 or 4 real publications who do it. Is that too many?
I mean, it depends on what you consider a publication, because I mean, we got websites all over the place. I mean, there are some legitimate websites out there that they cover one thing really well, or there's some print publications that have fallen off a little bit. So, I mean, to be clear, I mean, our industry and in the sport of wrestling has evolved over the years. It's not like when I was, back in the day when we see each other more than once a year. It was, whether I'm announcing a tournament at Hammond or covering the Beast of the East. I mean, it was like, okay, can we get a phone line to update this with, or, but being able to get a quote, get a video up online, it doesn't happen anymore. Social media did not exist. I mean, Facebook did, but you weren't getting statuses. Twitter changed everything in terms of how you're reporting stuff. I mean, it used to be, I remember when Alex Mead was out of Delaware, was going to commit, and his dad called me on Friday and says, I got it. And I'm sitting there. I just sat down at the bar. And I'm like, well, I just posted this story up on Intermat, and I wanted that was a good feature story. I wanted that to sit for over the weekend to get some clicks, to get some premium service subscriptions. Again, the news that pays the bills is getting the information over the news. And then about 10 minutes later, I called him back and says, Al, I'm grabbing my laptop. What's it going to be? And, boom, I got it up and out. So, that is now, that would be a tweet now. And, it's like that all that time it took for me to get the quote, to type it up, to kind of, beat my chest about, I got this one first, because, I mean, if you're not first,
right,
you're last, right, Ricky Bobby? But, there's also a degree of accuracy. And again, back to the sourcing thing. And it's like, I guess the misconception is you have to name your sources. And that's not, no, you don't have to name your sources.
Right. Well, we have, sourcing policies at the Sun where, generally you do want to name your sources. If the ideal situation for a newspaper article is for everyone to be on the record, who's talking.
Right.
Now, there are some times when you can't do that. You have something of a very sensitive nature where somebody could lose their job or whatever. There's a reason why they can't talk. And then you have to go through, we have a 3 anonymous sourcing policy. If we're going to go with something anonymous, we have to have 3 people tell it to us with firsthand knowledge. And then those people have to be cleared through the editor. And it's not just your editor, it has to be a senior editor.
Yeah, so, firsthand is also the key there, too. It's not like,
yes,
well, I heard this and I'm going to, do
this. They can't all be traced back to the same person. So, and that's a high standard because sometimes people will say, well, why didn't you run with that story that somebody else did? And we say, well, we couldn't verify it. So, that's a high standard. But so you should know when you see generally in the mainstream publications that somebody is using an anonymous source, if they're using the right standards, which they should be, that person has been quite vetted before that comment was put in the paper. In terms of wrestling media today, the proliferation of video has changed a lot of things. You can watch like every match, which is just great. I mean, you can watch old matches, you can watch the old Olympics, you can watch almost anything at the click of a finger, which I love personally. I do think that maybe in terms of the print coverage and internet coverage, because the local papers have been diminished, when I was growing up and you were growing up, I think you could find a lot more written coverage of wrestling than you can today. Which was, I love to read about the sport too. So I think that's gone down as video has gone up, which is a trade-off because it's great to watch the video.
Access has also improved considerably as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, having everybody have a Twitter account means that every one of these coaches and athletes has one too. So you can see like their inner thoughts as they're getting ready to wrestle. Or afterwards.
People are digging. They're looking at who follows the athlete. So and so. Oh, look, I found I remember Robin Bravo Young's recruitment. It's like, oh well, all these coaches are now following him. Gee, I wonder what's going on.
Yeah.
But, swinging it back to wrestling, let's talk some wrestling because you're a wrestler. You fancy yourself a wrestler. You've written a lot of good stories on wrestling, including one that initially put you. Oh, you've been on the list to come on this show for a long, long time. And a couple years ago, you're like, hey, yeah, check the story out. Beat the Streets Baltimore. Talk to me about that story as we make our segue into the wrestling discussion about Beat the Streets Baltimore. What's been going on down there and why that was such an engaging, intriguing piece for the Baltimore Sun to be interested in running.
Sure. Yeah. So. I went to the editors, and I generally do political coverage. So, but I said, hey, I want to do a story that's kind of like Friday Night Lights, but I want to tell it through the lives of a middle school wrestling program in Baltimore. And the reason I wanted to do this was because one, I feel like these coaches don't get a lot of attention. And they're really doing the Lord's work. Like they are, I've always felt if you want to make a difference in a kid's life, you should be a coach. Like you're doing something very good for society when you sign up to coach. And so for a year, in between all my other assignments covering bill passings and political debates and the like, I would go once a night or once a weekend or a couple times a week and check in with a team and follow the team around. And sorry, Jason, my 4-year-old's coming up here. So.
No worries.
And so I would check in with them, and I just wanted to see the impact that this program, Beat the Streets, was having on the lives of these kids. And, and I found it was really impactful, because what a lot of kids need is just somebody to take an interest in them and somebody to put them on the right path and say, block out all that nonsense, block out all that noise, and dedicate yourself to this. And I think wrestling in particularly has a great influence on people, as I talked about, but it really could be probably almost anything. As long as you have a coach or a mentor or a leader in your life to help you on the right path, you're going to end up being successful, or there's a better chance you will be. And in this case, out of that first camp, I believe Lydell Henry is the name of the gentleman who runs the Baltimore Beat the Streets. He had his very first camp, something like 80% of those kids ended up going to college. And so that's a tremendous figure in the city of Baltimore. And so if you can have that kind of impact on kids, and they've been spreading out this program both through middle school leagues, and they have summer camps, and they teach robotics, and they do math, and they stay after for tutoring, and they're taking the kids down to different tournaments all over the country. And so just staying involved in the lives of young people like that can have a big difference. So that's why I wanted to do the story. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see when they want to wrestle here. Yeah, we've got cameo appearances from Luke's kids here. This is, you can't see this because we're not doing video, but it's quite good.
Okay, let him in. Right.
You know what? I might not. I'm just going to leave this in. I'm just going to let the natural progression of fatherhood jump in, because
yeah. So this is Will. Hopefully we'll start wrestling next year, if we're allowed to wrestle again once this whole thing is over. So, but yeah.
I don't want to wrestle.
Okay, buddy. You
don't worry, kid. I feel the same way. Now, when we talk about that story, I want to tie this back into journalism again. The story about what Lydell's done, and Lydell's reached out to me in the past, and a couple fundraisers here and there. But when we talk about what doesn't get written, how hard is it for you to be kind of vested in you're vested in the output of what happens to those kids and the sport? And this is a clear case where a biased writer is writing something about they're passionate about. And how hard is it for you to try to trim these things down and say, there's so many good things you want to get into this story and tell the story, or tell the story about this kid or this kid or this kid. How hard is it for you to tone that down and say, all right, I got 1,200 words, maybe, lucky to get that much for a feature in the print these days. But, how do you decide what goes in, what goes out? And then what do you do with that extra stuff that's left over?
Right. So this one was 7,000 words. So they let me put a lot in there. But, like with any story, you have to be objective. So you have to, if bad things happen, they have to go in the story. So you're not editing out certain things to tell the story that you want to tell. So I couldn't make the team win the championship at the end of the year. I couldn't make certain kids not get hurt or certain kids not quit. Like that all had to go in and tell the true story of what happened. But yeah, when you spend that much time with the program and you have, you have just notebooks and notebooks full of notes, and it is like, what are the things that make the final cut? And I think in a story like that, you're looking for humanity. So you're looking for, my favorite moment in that story is there's a kid who's was 0-30 for the year, and he finally wins his first match in the wrestlebacks at the city tournament, and he starts crying, and he runs up, he starts hugging random people, he hugs the ref, he hugs people in the stands, and that was my favorite moment in the whole thing, was just that moments like that. So you try to find the slices of life that pull you beyond just the wins and the losses, and try to let you feel something like this person felt it.
Yeah, one thing that I think I recall through that story, and you'd sent it to me a year or two ago, whenever you had written it, was, it seemed like that the survival of this middle school league was always seemed to be in question. Was that in the back of your mind? It's like, man, I hope this thing doesn't shut down on me and I have a terrible story to write versus a good one.
Absolutely. I mean, it was very precarious. Like a lot of things in Baltimore are very precarious. The city itself is kind of precarious. It's losing population every year. There are cuts all the time to different things, cuts to school budgets. And the fact that they're able to keep this citywide middle school wrestling program going, basically because of one person, because Lydell Henry picks kids up in a van and drives them all over the place and hires every single coach and is able to fundraise enough to give people a small stipend so they can stay involved. It really is a testament to his efforts and what he's been able to do. Because if he's not doing that, I don't know who is. And I don't think there is a middle school wrestling program in Baltimore City that's putting all these kids on the high school teams and then eventually into colleges. So, and that, there's no way of knowing what happens without that. Does that kid just get into something else? Maybe. But also, does he get into nothing? And then he goes down the wrong path.
Yeah, getting into nothing. What is it? There's a whole lot of nothing to get in trouble with anywhere. But now, going back to your background, talk about wrestling at McDonogh. People know McDonogh because as a kid recently came out of there, had a pretty good career at the Ohio State, won a national championship, 4-time All-American. Yeah. So what's it like? What was your memories of McDonogh? How'd you start wrestling?
I started because a kid on the school bus named Will Filbert, who ended up being a national prep champion, recruited
Wrestled
me.
at Franklin and Marshall, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Will, I think he's in the FBI now. So shout out to Will if he's listening. But yeah, he said, you should come out for the team. And I was in 8th grade. And so I did. I started on junior varsity. I wasn't very good. I got pinned a lot over that. I eventually made the varsity team. I eventually made the starting lineup and did okay. Ended up wrestling in college and did okay again. Not some sort of star wrestler. I got in the lineup some but I did it all the way through. I really liked it. The thing I liked about it the most was that it was hard. That I wasn't naturally that great at it. I liked that it was a challenge every day. And I'd like that you could see yourself getting better too. That there was a certain appeal to this is going to sound weird, but there was a certain appeal to like the suffering of it, to like the pain and the.
Why do we go back if we're so bad? That's what I never understood. Why?
But yeah, and so I learned right away, like as soon as I got to be a freshman and I saw all the kids that were beating me have been wrestling for 10 years, I made my little brother start right away. And then my little brother, Alex, was very good. And he's like 10 times the wrestler I ever was. But he, and then I learned a lot over the years. Like I learned a lot of technique and I learned how to talk about the sport. And I learned like what motivates people to get better at it. And I would study why some kids won and some kids lost and what they did in that position. And so even though I wasn't that great, when I graduated, I just, started coaching my brother full time and he ended up being very, very good. And, so and then out of that, I started coaching at UMBC. So, and then we really built that program up into one of the top programs in the NCWA before I ended up moving on. But we were 3rd in the country at the national duels that final year. So we had a good little team on the hands.
and a couple different paths here, because you've got the national prep. I mean, McDonogh is a known entity, not just in Maryland. It's known nationwide. There's a pretty good coach there, knows what he's talking about. Then you go up to Ithaca, which has been Ithaca is a name program in Division III. A guy named Marty Nichols has been the coach there for almost 30 years. And, I guess compare your college coach and your high school coach. I mean, what did you learn from both of those guys?
God, I learned so much from both of them. Coach Welch, I think I learned a lot of things about character from him, about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, about never giving up, about one of the first things they taught you right away was you run back to the center, right? You go out of bounds, you beat the guy back to the center. Who cares if he's a better wrestler? Who cares if he knows more of the technique than you? You beat him back to the center. And that's just a great mentality for life, right? Beat the guy back to the center. Okay, he's smarter. Okay, he's tougher. Oh yeah, but show him that you want it more. Marty, I learned a lot of great technique and made a lot of really good friends wrestling at McDonogh. In fact, some of my best friends are still from McDonogh. Marty was a great technician. I learned so much good technique at Ithaca that, frankly, I wish I had picked up earlier in my career. Just great tilt series and great setups and all this Russian technique. And when you get to a college team, even though our high school team was very good, you only have maybe 4 or 5 really elite wrestlers on the high school team. When you get to college, even if it's Division III, everybody there is good. You got guys in the state finalists on the second and third string, so just being around all that, it becomes this great mixing pot of technique, and you sort of pick this up from the 2-time state finalist from Vermont, and pick this up from the kid from Long Island who was in the national finals last year, and you sort of it really rounded out my knowledge of the sport. And again, remember, this is pre-internet, where now I feel you can just sign up for an account and you can learn all the moves online. But back then it's much more sort of person to person how you learn technique. And especially for somebody like me who had started later in the sport, who hadn't gone through 4 or 5 different junior league coaches over the years, that was really helpful. So I felt when I came out of college, I had finally mastered the full technique library, but it was kind of late in my career. So that's when I was able to deploy that as a coach. So I felt I had learned all this stuff over the years, and it was kind of a waste not to use any of it. And so that's when I really started, teaching my brother and teaching his friends, and then teaching a whole team.
Been an advocate for Division III wrestling and basically every level of wrestling since really I've discovered each individual ones. I remember my first Division III Nationals was in 2009, and it was a life-changing experience. And for a Division III athlete, the entire experience is true student athlete. What was something that you gained out of going to Ithaca that you feel that Division III experience could only have prepared you for the rest of your life?
Yeah, well, I knew I had no business on a Division I team, to be honest. But I did think that I could maybe get in the lineup or contribute points in tournaments or something for a Division III team. And what you learn right away is Division III is very hard. That Division III is not for bad wrestlers. You've got to be a good wrestler to compete and do well in Division III. So I had to get a lot tougher and a lot better real quick. Just to compete with the other guys in the room. But it is, Division I, it's these blue chips. It's this, whereas the Division III guys are more working class. You have to be scrappy, I think. So you're not, these aren't people that were treated like wrestling gods their whole life coming up. So, but I would say that, the experience at Ithaca really helped me both from the educational standpoint, in terms of pursuing a career in writing, with just what I learned from the teachers in the writing center, and also from the life lessons from wrestling. So even though I didn't end up ultimately pursuing coaching beyond a few 8 years, those lessons still continue on.
Yeah, and there's also the opportunity, even if you're not a banger coming into Division III, a guy like Logan Hermson from Wisconsin Stevens Point a couple years ago, he was under 500 his first season, with considerable matches under his belt, and then wins 2 national titles. It's pretty crazy. Now, when you move out of Ithaca, and then you're back in Maryland. People like to go back home, and you have the opportunity to coach at the University of Maryland-Baltimore County, which was an NCWA team, for lack of a better term. This was a club program. There are some varsity programs within the NCWA. My neighborhood apprentice school is one of them, back in my old stomping grounds of Newport News, Virginia. But explain the situation on was UMBC an active club when you showed up? Was that something you started, or talk, I guess, about the genesis, the birth of UMBC wrestling?
So, and you're right. And just one thing before I move on, when I was at wrestling in the Empire division in D3, the big wrestler in our division was Matt Hamill. For those of you UFC fans, he was at RIT just crushing everybody. So D3 had some serious dudes. But
yeah. What's up, Doc? I gotta wrestle Hamill. Huh, you poor bastard.
Yes, yeah. So I came home. I started writing for the local newspaper, and one of the kids I had been coaching with my brother had signed up and was going to UMBC. And Dr. Brown, who was the athletic director, was a big wrestling guy. He really wanted to make UMBC have a wrestling program and eventually turn into a Division I team. He's no longer there, and I don't think those plans are still in the works, unfortunately. But so I went up one day. They had a club practice, and they asked me up to show a series, because one of the kids I've been coaching was at the club. And I started showing like armbar tilts and all the different ways you can armbar tilt somebody. And the AD was in the room, was like, "This is great. The kids all loved you. Like they all were hanging on your every word. And would you consider doing this?" And so I thought about it, and I said, okay. And so they had started the club team for a couple of years before that, but they hadn't had any All-Americans yet. They hadn't had a national champ yet. They hadn't really done anything at the national tournament. And so I said, sure. And my first year there, we had half a lineup and didn't do very well. But I've always been good at promoting things, I think, and getting people excited about stuff and recruiting and getting people to come in. And so by my second year, we started getting All-Americans at the national tournament. We had 3 national finalists. We had my brother won the national title. And Alex Broadwater, shout out if you're listening. And I think we had like 14 All-Americans by the time I left, and we were 3rd in the country. And I always really wanted to beat the apprentice school. Like they were our rivals. They used to kick the crap out of us when I first showed up. And I think we beat them the last 4 times we wrestled them. And so I went out with a good with a good streak against apprentice right before I left. So finally, during this time, my wife and I had 2 kids who you just saw, and so I had to make a choice between. I felt like I could be 2 of 3 things. I could be a good wrestling coach, a good journalist, or a good dad, and something had to go. I couldn't be all 3. And so it had to be wrestling. So the journalism was paying much more money by then, and I wasn't going to not be a good dad, so that had to happen.
Looking at some of the names of the All-Americans, of course, your brother was three times. A guy named Daniel Carr, right in your era, he was a 3-time All-American in the NCWA. Yes, I have these. I have these records. I've always wondered what the story was with Eldar Muradov. Like, he sounds like he's a wrestler because everybody in wrestling here, they see the they see a guy named Eldar, and he's wrestling. They assume he's got to come from some wrestling background. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, Eldar, Alex, and I went to Budapest for the World Championships a couple years ago. Eldar showed up one day, just walked onto campus. He heard we had a team. He wasn't enrolled in the school yet. He grew up in Russia, is of Turkish descent, and had been a good wrestler in his youth in Russia, but he hadn't wrestled in like 10 years. And he shows up to practice. And he says, "Coach, can I roll around with the guys or whatever?" I said, "Yeah." Everyone's kicking his butt. Like the 141 pounders pinning him. Like everybody's just, but I could tell the guy was going to be good. Like you could see how the way he moved that he like just needed to get his reflexes and his timing back. And he kept getting up and going back to the guys who would pin him again and beat him again. And then, but I knew like he had something special. And so then like a week later, he's starting to beat the guys who used to beat him. And then 2 weeks later, He's trying to beat the guys. We get him enrolled in the school. I show him how to fill out all the paperwork and do everything. And, by the end of the year, I'm not sure if he was an All-American that first year or maybe the second year, but he starts placing at the tournament. And then he starts winning Division III tournaments, and he's the champion of this or that Division III tournament. He starts beating Division III All-Americans. And I believe last year, after years off, he just showed up at the tournament with one of the club teams from Ohio and got
Ohio
second.
State. Yeah. That's why I'm asking, because I saw the name pop up. I'm like, what are the odds? There's another Eldor Muradov that's wrestling in the NCWA. And look, there it is. It's 8 years between placements.
He wrestled for me for 2 years, and then I left. And then I guess so he took maybe a decade off, and then he came back, and now he's got another placement.
Yeah, took the extended mission.
He had some unorthodox techniques. He did this back hook that Sadalayev does, and then whips you back with it. So my assistant coach, Mike Hornzell, who's actually now at Harvard Law School, he and I would go up and we'd tell the refs, you got to watch out for this move that he does, because a lot of refs weren't giving him back points. So we'd always prime him. And then, sure enough, they'd be quick to jump on that and give him his back points. But he had some unorthodox stuff that some of the college wrestlers from our country hadn't really seen before.
Like when the Granby guys would go to the Northeast, and it's like, wait, what? No, how did they score that?
Time you saw Granby, whoa, what's that?
No, through that whole process, you talked about if you really want to make an impact on people's lives, be a coach. What did you learn the most about wrestling coaching now? Let's put it the other way. We talk about how much, people learn from wrestling in their real jobs. What did your job in wrestling, your coaching job, help you with your real job? Well, your job now, full time.
Coaching is very important with terms of teaching you to be a good manager. I think the main thing, because you gotta know when to be hard on people, when to be nurturing the people, when to build them up, when to check them when they get overconfident, when to keep people in line when they're being arrogant or disrespectful. You've got to be like a psychologist. You've got to be a mom sometimes. You got to be a day planner and an educator. You've got to do all these things in these people's lives to make sure that they're at their best, they're being successful, and then they're there in the place that they need to be for the team and can deliver at their maximum potential. So it's to be a good coach is super time consuming and very hard because you have to be involved in every one of your wrestlers' lives. What I found the most important thing is you got to be yourself. You got to be authentic. And I feel like a lot of coaches sometimes play the coach they're supposed to play in some movie or something. And if that's not natural for you, if you're not a guy who yells at people, don't be a yeller then. Just be yourself. Connect to the kids in the best way you can. Obviously, you have to master technique. You have to have a certain bar of wrestling knowledge and excellence. And then you have to know your own weaknesses and fill those in. So if you're not a great strength and conditioning guy, you got to make sure you have somebody like that in your staff who's helping them. If you're not a good enough wrestler yourself to push your upper weights, then you got to bring in somebody who can wrestle with those guys and beat them up. If you're deficient in some technical area, you should be aware of that and bring in the right person who can add that technique to the repertoire. And I also feel like sometimes we grow up in American wrestling where we think we can just condition people to death. Whereas conditioning is very important. It is obviously very important to be in better condition than your opponents, but that should not be at the expense of making them good wrestlers first. And so I see a lot of coaches just have their guys running sprints down the halls and they're never getting better at wrestling. And I think that's a mistake. You gotta make them better at wrestling first and then make sure they're in better shape and mentally tougher.
What about the dynamic of having to do all that in a club situation where you are not a varsity program? You don't have the access to all the things that varsity athletes get, like academic support, training tables, typically things of that nature. And you might only have maybe an hour and a half to get all this stuff done. You can't spend all that time conditioning when, how much technique time do we have? So I guess explain, I'd ask you what the benefits of Division III were for you. What are the benefits and what are the great things about the NCWA and the club wrestling circuit that are for young coaches like you? Sean Lally got a Division III job coming out of a club program. You've talked about how much you enjoy coaching, but the NCWA and its role in collegiate wrestling and the opportunities for kids. I mean, explain, I guess the benefits to it.
Well, I've always said it would be nice if the NCWA didn't have to exist. I wish every single program that was in the NCWA had a varsity team and got treated the right way. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in.
Especially the last 2 months.
Yeah, there have been so many cuts at all these schools,
and counting.
So there's still a lot of kids who want to wrestle, and I've always felt that wrestling isn't fun if you're losing, and wrestling isn't fun if you're out of shape. So what's fun in wrestling is winning. So
I don't know much about that, to be honest with you.
so I don't, that's what I said, like, look. You may think you're walking into a club here where you're fooling around, but those aren't my expectations, and those aren't the expectations of this team. You can go somewhere else if that's what you want to do. But this is not like a pickup thing where you're going to shoot 2 takedowns and give up 1 and then walk out the door. We're going to run this like a varsity, and you got to buy into that. And once, some people would not come back after the first team meeting because of that, but I made it clear that we expected to win. We were going to be in shape. No, it's not. I never scheduled tournaments over Christmas or over Thanksgiving or things like that. Like, I didn't want to. I still was knowledgeable that these are not Division
It's not their
I.
job. It's not. Yes. I mean, just kind of a lot like Division III. It's not your job. You're there because you want to be there, but it's not. You're not getting a scholarship for this. Okay.
Right, and I would always, So I was, mindful. I was cognizant of making sure that we were in the best position to win, pushing them hard enough, making sure everyone bought in and cared about the program being successful, but also being realistic. And some kids would have to work a second job or whatever, and I would say, okay, well, I know you can't make Tuesdays and Thursdays. Okay, so what we're going to do is you and me are going to lift in the morning on those mornings, and then we're going to go for a run, it was just, I met people where they were, and I made sure that to the best I could, everyone had a chance to succeed, and that you knew that my goal was to make you the best version of you, and not to make you be somebody who you're not, or do something that is unreasonable or can't work with your life.
So what's next for you after you've got this award, you've got your pretty good career there, right in Baltimore, covering politics. No offense, dude, I hate politics. So I am not a I guess a consumer of your work regularly anymore, because I honestly do, like I said, and it's Maryland. I don't live in the state. Now, granted, if you came to Minnesota and did some work here, I'd probably be reading it, because it's a pretty interesting political climate here, even though, again, I hate talking politics, but I'll consume a little bit of it. But again, it's not my favorite topic. But so that being said, what's next for you?
Well, I'm going to keep moving on in journalism. I should have some personal news coming soon. But I'll let you know when that's public. But yeah, I mean, I'm just going to keep doing the best job I can of holding government officials accountable, holding powerful people accountable, making sure that our taxpayer dollars are spent wisely, and that if there's anything untoward going on in government, that I'm going to try to expose it.
I guess the last thing I kind of want to throw out there, because again, people they want to, I guess the media becomes an enemy, even though people are like, well, you're the media. I'm like, dude, I cover wrestling. Okay. I'm not part of that mainstream media problem, but you work for a rather large paper with a pretty good circulation, yet you're drilled down into the local scene right now. So you've kind of got that dichotomy of, yeah, this is a big paper that's, can be viewed one way by the masses, but you've got this local stuff that's important to John Q. taxpayer, that's important to the person, your next door neighbor. It's not necessarily important to, the guy in Seattle who's railing on about any political fake news, hate, media stuff. So, I mean, I guess the balance of the big paper with that cares about the little guy, that's not dead.
Yeah. I mean, the higher you go in life, the more criticism you get. I mean, that's true. The more impact you have, the more people will attack you. Like, you got to expect that. That's true in wrestling too. As people get more famous and win more championships, like,
they want to see you lose. They want to see you lose.
You got to expect that. You just got to have a thick skin in this business. You cannot let criticism get you down, but at the same time, you can't ignore valid criticism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true with being an athlete too, right? If some coach comes to you and says, you know what, you're really failing in this, you could take that the wrong way and get angry and defensive, or you could accept it and think, is that legit? And then try to improve on it. So I do think it's important to keep an open ear to criticism, and then consider it. And if it's nonsense, dismiss it. And if it's valid, then try to do better.
Finished up with Luke Broadwater. He was a Division III athlete at Ithaca, a NCWA coach, and now he's got a Pulitzer Prize to add to his resume. I'm not sure where he's going to put that, at the top or at the bottom. Luke, been a while since we talked. Been a great conversation. I feel like we could talk about media rights, ethics, all that stuff for hours at a time. But it sounds like you've got some Paw Patrol to watch, and so do I. So good to hear from you. And those of you that are interested out there in finding out more about where you can follow Luke, tell them where you can be found on social.
My Twitter is just Luke. It's just at Luke Broadwater. So you can check me out on Twitter. I post most of the stories there, and every now and then I will engage in a wrestling discussion, but that's not as often these days. So, but yeah, thanks so much, Jason, for having me on the show. This was really, really fun. And I feel like the last time we saw each other was either at Fargo or Beast of the East. So that's probably like a decade ago. So it was great to catch up with you.
Yeah, the Beast would have been 2007, which is the calendar is 13. Fargo, that's the problem. See, real quick, side story. I'm back home in Virginia a couple years ago. I'm in line at a dual meet at Tab High School, or a quad meet. My alma mater was wrestling there, and I'm walking in, and some guy behind me, it's actually BC LaPrade from Virginia Tech's dad. He goes, "Hey, did I meet you in Fargo?" I was like, "Sir, you're going to have to be more specific." He goes, "We're at the bar." I'm like, "Sir, you're going to have to be more specific." The Bison Turf. I said, "Sir, you're going to have to be more specific." So 21 years of Fargo, that's in jeopardy right now, but that's a whole nother story in its entirety. Luke, man, always good to hear from you. Just, maybe have to, when you get some wrestling breaks and news, whatevers, we can talk some more on the show.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is proudly outfitted by Compound Sportswear. Shirts, singlets, custom gear orders, everything you need. Call up Cliff and the crew at cmpteamwear.com. Hey, you know what? Did you like the show? You want to hit that subscribe button? MatTalkOnline.com/listen. Various different ways to subscribe to this show on your favorite podcatcher of choice. And if you're already subscribed and you already listened and you love the show and you want to support this show and this network, MatTalkOnline.com/join the team. Become a team member today.